So in undergrad, I started traveling a little bit overseas, and the more I got to experience life in kind of underdeveloped, underserved countries, the more I enjoyed being in those types of environments and those cultures. So I joined Pfizer, and they had this Global Health Fellows program, and it was kind of a no-brainer. They would, it was kind of a lengthy process to apply. It was actually like applying to Fordham, really. But once you got accepted, they were willing to send you overseas. They were going to hold your job, pay your salary, and pretty much provide all the resources that you need to work overseas. So I figured, of course I'm going to apply to this program. And so I want to say that up front because I just want to be clear that the program is exclusive to Pfizer employees. But anyway, so yeah, so for me, it was about kind of gaining experience and also, thank you. Yeah, so anyways, I also had an interest in microfinance. I had read a book called Banking Singapore by Mohammed Yunus that maybe you guys are familiar with. And I just really believed in the power of microfinance and empowering people for small loans. So I was a student here at Fordham, and I wanted to learn more about microfinance. I was in the GPMBA program. And I got accepted to the fellowship, so I took a leave from my MBA program, but they actually allowed me to do an independent study, so I didn't necessarily have to take a leave. Once I got back, they graded my paper and gave me credit for it. So that was also part of my motivating factor, is the desire to learn more about microfinance firsthand, which I was able to do over there through an independent study and conducting lots of interviews with those that have experienced the ethical and non-ethical side of dealing with different microfinance institutions. There's lots of reasons that I wanted to be overseas, but in a nutshell, those are the two main ones.
Somebody else?
Okay, I'll just share with you why I volunteer. I learned from my mother years ago that there's a certain fulfillment that comes from giving of yourself. And I learned that when I joined the choir in my country, and it wasn't just about singing, but it was about evangelizing, as well as through our singing, as well as doing projects like visiting old people's homes and orphanages. And I noticed, then I learned that there was a certain fulfillment that just came from giving of oneself. When I came to the United States for school, that continued. I've been able to stay involved in activities outside my academic area, and that gives me a lot of fulfillment, I must say. So that's all I'll say.
For me, basically, I'd seen a presentation at work from a nurse who'd been in Swaziland, and I was completely captivated by her photos, especially the children, and just the landscape, and the red soil, and the foliage, and everything. It was just unbelievable. And I thought, how do these people maneuver and get through an AIDS epidemic like we did in the United States? And I lived in San Francisco and had a lot of experience and lost many close friends and colleagues, and then I just couldn't even imagine how anyone could get through this with no electricity, no running water, no medicine. And so I felt just called to go and see what I could do to help. Okay.
So first of all, I just want to welcome all of you. Thank you for coming. As Richard said, my name is Jimmy Pardo. I'm from Los Angeles. I'm a physician there. And I think it's important to realize that all of us, I think, have volunteered for different reasons. And whatever that reason is, it doesn't matter. What matters is that it's what motivates us to want to go out and do something different. For me, it was the fact that when my brother was born, he ended up getting polio a few years when he was about 3 or 4 years old. He couldn't walk. He was in a wheelchair. And my parents were from Mexico, and they had no education. My mother finished 2nd grade, my father finished 3rd grade. And there was a missionary doctor that had come from Los Angeles to give a service. He was an orthopedic surgeon. And he met my family and said, you know, I think I could do something for your son. Why don't you bring him to Los Angeles? Of course, my parents said, you know, we can't. We don't have the money to do that. This particular orthopedic surgeon said, don't worry, we're going to sponsor him. That's how my family came to Los Angeles. My brother had over 20 surgical procedures done. And he was able to walk finally when he was about 10 years old. And that always stuck in my mind. I'm the youngest of 7, by the way. That always stuck in my mind, and I said, one day I would like to do something like that, to help someone else. And I didn't know how that was going to be. By fate or luck, I ended up being a physician. And during my training, I had an opportunity to work in Zambia and Cameroon. And I think as many other panelists have said, the level of poverty and need that you see motivates you to say, what can I do? Because there's a lot of people out there that are suffering. And that was sort of my motivation for wanting to volunteer. I ended up volunteering with CMB. I decided to do it for 6 months. And I ended up staying 2.5 years because it was just such a wonderful experience. But what I took out of it, from that volunteer experience the most, was that no matter how much I thought I gave the people there, they gave me much more. I took a lot more from them than I could have ever possibly given to them. And what I took from them was their generosity, the fact that they opened the doors to their home, the fact that they gave me what they didn't have. It's kind of like the story in the Bible that there's a woman, she's in the chapel, and everyone's giving a donation, right? I'm sure you guys know the story, and the scribes and everyone's giving these large amounts of money. And this woman that's a widow comes and gives 2 coins, and Jesus tells the people, that woman has given much more than anyone else. And that was my motivation for volunteering. I just wanted to give more of myself.
Maybe Amber and Laura could address if your motivation changed at all once you kind of that honeymoon phase of the experience ended and began.
Sure, thank you. Can you hear me?
Just pull the mic closer.
That's fine. All right. I would say it definitely changed. The honeymoon phase, everything is really new and exciting and exotic, and you're just trying to process so much at once, including, in my case, trying to learn a new language. But what I realized after the first month or 2 was what definitely changed was kind of my ability to say no to things, which is something you maybe don't think about when you're a new volunteer somewhere, the importance of saying no. But you have to realize your own limitations at the same time, and realize that you can't take everything on because you probably won't do anything well, but maybe it's better to focus on a select number of things instead. So definitely after that honeymoon phase was over, I stopped kind of overbooking myself a little bit and learned my own limits and learned to say no to things as hard as it was. But at the same time, I think my motivation increased in that time period too, because I started to realize not just how many needs were there, but how much I wanted to do in the time I had. And I thought a year would be sufficient. But after a couple of months, I was going, oh my gosh, I only have a year. How am I going to kind of achieve what I want to get done in that time? So I would say definitely that my motivation only increased after the honeymoon phase, though it was sort of more of a fine-tuned selective process at that point as I kind of understood better the needs of the community and how I could be most effective.
I would definitely have to agree with Amber. In the beginning, you get there and you kind of see all these things, you're all doe-eyed and excited and everything's wonderful. But I think the realistic part of things of having to choose what you want to focus on. For me, I was working in a hospital, there was only one doctor there. So I was so excited, like, oh, I could also promote health in this way or do this in that way. And at the end of the day, there's just too many patients to physically see. There's one doctor. I was the only other mid-level practitioner. There's a few nurses. All we ended up doing was seeing patients. Like, I saw so many opportunities for initiatives, like public health initiatives, and a lot of other opportunities, but you really just have to focus on one thing.
Alex, you want to take us in the direction?
Yeah, I think, how's that? It's interesting to me, Laura, that you said you arrive in the field and everything's kind of wonderful. My experience has always been that everything's absolutely terrifying. And, but I wondered whether you're terrified or delighted with what you encountered. What the things that surprised you most from practicing overseas as a doctor myself. I find there are hundreds of things where it's not just that I wasn't expecting them, but they fundamentally challenge what I believe about medicine or any number of other things about the world. So I was just wondering if you or anybody else could comment on what surprised you most.
For me, I think I was extremely surprised by how little we had, the limited resources we had. We didn't even have an X-ray machine. We're doing anesthesia and surgery, doing manual blood pressure cuff, and a CBS pulse oximeter that I brought to the States. So, I mean, you're doing these major surgeries, and all these outcomes are really positive. I was like, how are all these people surviving? To be quite honest, like, I was surprised by how well people did with such limited resources. My eyes were open to, wow, we don't really need that fancy stuff, that all those rotations I was doing, all these CAT scan machines, this and that. Just really getting down to a basic, like, history, physical, a good examination, and how, you know, just primary tools could really affect and have positive impact on someone's health.
You know, most of the patients I encountered unfortunately died. So I had done a lot of hospice care here in New York as well. And again, it was just dealing with no resources. And, you know, we'd get in the truck in the morning, go out and have some Tylenol and maybe some Benadryl and some Advil for pain. And I'm thinking, how am I going to treat these patients with this horrible thrush and cachexia and just so sick. But, you know, the body takes care of itself in a way, you know, through dehydration. There truly is less pain. It was very interesting to experience that, and that you can still die with dignity and respect even if you're in a hut with no running water, no electricity, as long as you're present and you allow others to do their role and to help and not to completely take over.
Anyone else? And then stand out as surprising.
I'm going to steal your microphone, sorry about that, but we can share. So, you know, I think I just want to reiterate what Laura said, that you're surprised about with how much you can do with so little, especially in places where you have no electricity, no running water, and no real sewage. And you really can do a lot for the families. And what surprised me the most, all the things that I did, was that the amount of love that I saw the family members give their children, their grandmothers, their grandparents. You know, they say that if you do things with love, you can move mountains, and I think that was what surprised me the most. That patients that I really didn't expect to survive, patients that I gave up on, the family would come there and say, no, let's just give them one more chance, let's do one more thing for them. And surprisingly, it worked. And that's what surprised me the most, that despite being a community that seems to have so little or nothing, the amount of optimism that you see is just incredible. And that's what really motivates you to keep pushing forward.
Just picking up on what you said, Jimmy, and what Shepard said as well, it struck to me that working in resource-poor settings, medicine has a huge social role beyond whatever the evidence base would say, whatever the gold standard of care. And I wondered if that broadened your thinking about your roles when you're working back here, or whether it changed the way you practiced before.
I think, I think as much as I would like to think I could adapt that same philosophy in a westernized culture, it's very difficult. Unfortunately, we're in the operating room here. I'm not saying, hey, let me use the manual blood pressure cuff. It doesn't really work. So I just think it's very difficult to kind of take that out. I mean, I think, my physical skills, my physical examination skills, and those types of things, I rely on more, and I feel like I have better skills because of my experience. But a lot of the attitude that, oh, we don't need as much, and trying to do more of it is really difficult to translate to Western medicine.
And a lot of it is redirecting hope. You know what I mean? There's hopelessness because someone's child's dying or they're dying. And I don't mean to make it sound horribly bleak, but the average life expectancy in Swaziland is only 32. So just kind of redirecting hope that you can be present with your loved one as they die and do what a mother wants to do and hold her child. I mean, that really makes a huge difference.
I'll kind of add from a different perspective. Since I don't have a medical background, I can kind of speak to what surprised me. So a lot of these NGOs that these wonderful, very talented people are working for also need a lot of support in the back end. And so I went over there because I had visited Africa before, and I really wanted the opportunity to go back and give back. And so I went over there, not very confident with how much I was going to be able to provide. But what I really realized was, as it's been alluded to, they're very, very low resourced. And so even though I wasn't a physician or a PA, you know, I was able to support these organizations in the back end. There's people, you know, that need to, you know, manage the policies, the procedures, the HR, and even though you're working with, in a lot of these international NGOs over there, you're working with people that are college educated, they don't have the same sort of fundamental kind of education that we all are very fortunate to receive here in the United States. So I was able to actually give back in a lot of ways that I didn't realize. So if there's anybody who's sitting in the audience and thinking, I don't really know what I could provide, there's actually a lot more than you can probably do. So I would definitely encourage you, you know, to certainly not hold back. When you get over there, you realize that there's a lot that you can do and a lot that you can provide that you wouldn't realize until you get over there.
I just wanted to add that one of the things that I think I took away the most was the meaning of dignity. And you know, here in Western medicine, sometimes we think dignity means how many tests you do, how many nurses are taking care of a patient, how pretty the room is. I mean, in my hospital, you get a menu. I've never been in a hospital, you can get a menu, but it's nice. And then you transition to somewhere in sub-Saharan Africa where people don't even have a bed to lay on, or where you have 2 or 3 children to one bed, and one of them is bleeding next to the one that's coughing, next to the one that's having diarrhea. And the way it's influenced my practice here in the US is that when I see patients with complaints that I feel that are not as serious as they may be making them out to be, I'll share with them some of my experiences that I had in Kenya. And what that does is incredibly, invariably, they tell me they feel a lot better. Somehow just knowing that the conditions and the limited medical access that other people have makes them feel better. And that's been the major influence in my practice.
You've all talked about the difficulties that you encounter in the field there. How do you maintain optimism in that situation? I asked Scott before we started, was there ever a time you just said, I want to go home? You know, just because everything was so difficult. How do you keep your spirit up so that you can continue to do work for a year or 6 months or whatever it is you've committed to?
I was working with an incredible doctor, Dr. Tomatina, who is also a CMSE volunteer. So for me personally, like anytime I kind of was like, after a few months being like, wow, I've been on call 24/7, I'm really tired. Like, he's been here a year as the only doctor 24/7 on call. I'm going to shut up and just go with this. So I mean, I think for me, I kind of drew a lot of inspiration from him because he's just such an incredible doctor and was just very inspirational. So anytime I kind of felt like, wow, this is really hard, I just looked at him and I'm like, it doesn't seem like this is that hard for him. So I think I took a lot of motivation from the people around me.
And I'll also add from the perspective of a doctor who is a Zambian-American doctor who goes to Zambia once a year to volunteer. So I picked on his brain for this panel discussion. Really, from what I learned, it's what motivates them to, I mean, the optimism, maintaining optimism comes from awareness of the challenges that people, you know, face, kind of spurs you to go on. And then also the appreciation shown from the people. They have so little, but they give so much. I remember one of my first jobs as well, straight from high school, was to be part of the Food and Agriculture Organization research, and my mother felt I needed to just do something, but I thought I was, you know, literally helping them, but I learned so much from the humble people, the poor people. They were so happy with so little. And then also making a difference to propels people to want to do more. And mission trips also provide people with a totally different perspective. You kind of take a look at, you know, you begin to be thankful for what you have. On a personal level as well, since coming here, sometimes I can't stand how much waste there is because I have lived in a developing country. I was born there and I grew up there, so I kind of have perspectives from both. And so, I just don't like to see how much people take for granted and how much waste there is. It hurts me because I know people don't have that much. That's where I come from.
On a personal level, for me, I think a big piece of what helped me through some of the obstacles I faced too was just faith in God, and just it was really cool to see my own personal journey spiritually throughout the year and how the experiences I had were impacted, and how my faith grew throughout the year played a big role in the obstacles I did face. And also, I tried to do the kind of the positive sandwich thing, so looking at something and trying to put a positive spin. Maybe one of the frustrating things one day for me would be how slow the culture moved when I was back in Peru, and just how something that could take 20 minutes here in the U.S. can take 3 days there, and it could be really frustrating when you're only there for a year. But at the same point, that was something I loved about the culture, and I had to remind myself, well, I love that because that means every night I drink tea for 3 hours with my family, and I get to know the culture a little bit better, and that's something that contributes to their morals and their family values that I love so much about the culture. So I think one thing that helped me a lot personally too was just trying to take every negative and spin it in a positive way a little bit too.
I think just one other thing, like acknowledgement that you're not going to change the world or the town or wherever you are, but you might make it very different for an individual, and that kind of make a huge difference.
How do you become part of that local culture, language, practices? I mean, you just talked about learning how to slow down a little bit, but how do you adapt to something that's completely different from what you experienced?
There's no one way would be to kind of join in some of the customary behaviors. For instance, in Africa, most women wear wrappers to church. You don't wear pants. So sometimes people can kind of like just join in, kind of like make people feel that they understand the culture and they are open to it. And then also by eating their food, there's a basic connection that comes in doing something that basic.
Just to add to that, I think I spoke about it a little bit yesterday, but just opening yourself to that culture and being slow to criticizing the way things are done or the way you see things. I think if you're slow to criticize and you open yourself up to that culture, people are really welcoming and they're excited to learn about you. Because for many, it may be the first opportunity they've had to speak to someone that's from another part of the world or another country that's not their own. And once you initiate that cultural exchange, I think it's very, very useful. One of the issues that can happen when you're working in a missionary hospital is that you may be surrounded by 20 or 30 other volunteers, for example. And invariably, we like to stay around people that we feel comfortable with. But part of being part of another community is breaking away from that group and really trying to immerse ourselves in that other culture. Because if people see that, they trust you more, they open themselves much more to you, and your experience becomes that much more positive.
An important avenue where we were was there was a mass in Siswati, and then there was one in English, and we'd always go to the Siswati mass, and so the local community really liked that, and they got a big kick out of our horrible language skills. So that was fun, and sometimes we'd round up some of the kids in the town and take them to get their haircuts. It's very important to have a good haircut there. And shop at the local markets. They love that when I'd go and buy fruits and vegetables, and they'd say, "You can't cook. You're not a woman. Are you a mage?" And they would just laugh at me, like, "No, I'm gonna go home and cook." Like, "No, you can't. You need a woman. What's wrong with you?" So they would certainly got to know me more.
I wonder, from the perspective of Jimmy and Claire especially, Jimmy, you probably brought not just the LA culture, but also the culture from Mexico with you when you went to Kenya. And Claire, you bring your culture here how does that experience work when you're bringing part of your culture with and introducing that to other people?
Go ahead, Gary. You know, we're all diverse human beings and we all have different interests. And I think when you bring a second culture to your experience, it's that much more diverse. 2 weeks ago, I went down to Mexico for a mission trip that I do at clinic with volunteer. And when I was coming back, I was speaking to some of the people, and I said, you know, it's just like Kenya, except they're not African and they don't speak Swahili. And I think the point I was trying to make is that poverty is universal. And the necessities that you may see in sub-Saharan Africa, or even in some of our own communities here in New York, Los Angeles, Mexico, are sort of basic necessities that exist everywhere. And when people see that you're coming with multiple perspectives, it makes them more open to accepting you, because they see that you're not becoming very narrow, like a racehorse just going in one direction, but rather you're taking 2 steps back and you're looking around and surveying the situation. There's a perfect example in the Daily Nation, which is the Kenyan newspaper. There was an article that close to Kibera, which is one of the slums there, every day about 3,000 to 4,000 people rummage through the waste dumps. And what they're doing is that they're eating the leftover food from the airplanes from Kenya Airways. It gets thrown out what they don't eat on the airplane. And you see children that are 3, 4, 5 years old going through the waste, eating the leftover piece of apple or the piece of bread. And I was reading that article when I was there, and I was thinking, boy, that's just like what I remember as a child in Mexico. I remember going to the waste dump and children running out to jump on the truck to see what they can get, eating food that's half-eaten or rotten. And that just puts it into perspective that no matter where you are in the world, the necessities are still the same. Again, human dignity.
Can I pick up on your? Can I just pick up on your question about the kind of local culture and the way working with you? What's interesting about all of you as volunteers, whether you're PAs, physicians, or private sector or from the business world, is that whereas you've spoken about the kind of importance of that humility of understanding the world you're in, you're also bringing a certain amount of expertise, which often may collide with local practices, local ways of doing things in a hospital, different protocols, different ways of organising things, different priorities, but even very simple priorities, whether women and children are put first as opposed to men, things like this. How did you manage when your natural inclination towards humility and kind of local integration comes up against an idea that, you know, children who are very sick are more important than, you know, middle-aged men who aren't very sick, that kind of thing? Did you encounter those kind of dilemmas, and how did you deal with imposing your medical expertise on a different culture in a different place? Why should I just say medical or business or whatever expertise it is that you
Well, throughout my year, I did a little bit of continuing education and some teaching while I was down there, and it's such a fine line you walk. You really don't want to offend anyone or say that I'm American, my way is better, but at the same time you want to kind of share the evidence and maybe help them improve their practice. But I think one thing that really helped maybe get people to take me a little more seriously was I kind of tried to approach it as a teamwork, collaborative, or like, show me, how do you do this? I have never seen this before. Can you teach me? I went to local courses that were put on by Peruvians in rehabilitation, and as an attendee, and just kind of see how they ran it and learn from them as well, because it really is collaboration more than just me being an expert or having more years of education than that. So I think it helped to just kind of show that I was invested and interested in learning as well, versus kind of a one-way street, which ultimately helped.
Era, how did that work for you?
So I worked for WaterAid for a period of 6 months in Tanzania. I also had the opportunity to volunteer on a short-term basis in Peru. Peru in an orphanage, and also in Ghana in a rural village, working on a water and sanitation project. But regardless of the situation, I would always, whenever I would introduce myself, would always pretty much put it out there that I was there to really learn from them. Because at the end of the day, anything that you do that does not involve the people that it's for is not going to be sustainable. You walk away, and your imprint can easily, be wiped away. So particularly the work that I did with WaterAid was all about collaboration. Nothing that I did or implemented did not involve a number of other people, and I also took a very cross-functional approach. I wouldn't just ask, the marketing person or the sanitation person or the water person or the country manager. I would always really try and get everybody involved. And so basically what I would do is I would come up, I would learn a lot in the beginning. It was all about asking questions. It was me listening, asking questions, and not talking very much. And so that allowed me the opportunity to take some time to come up with some different scenarios to present to them, and to then allow them to kind of choose the path, if you will, for us to take to work together to resolve any issue that was really outstanding. So it really was all about collaboration and working together with them to ensure that whatever I was working on in any country or with any organization, it was sustainable.
So that's always a big challenge, because you're walking into a culture that realistically we don't understand and we don't know much about. If we're lucky, maybe we know what language they speak, but that's about it. And often we may want to say, well, I went to university in the United States and I trained as a physician and I know what's best, but that's not always the right approach, because that's not the way they perceive things. Perfect example, I don't know what your thoughts are, but I had a patient that came in one day, was having very high fevers. He was a 4-year-old child. And the mom says, don't worry, I've been taking care of him at home. I said, okay, what have you been doing? She said, well, I went to the local medicine doctor, and he gave me these herbs, and he told me to mix them with a little bit of cow dung, and to feed it to my child 3 times a day, and then with that, his fever would go away. She's not stupid. She's not ignorant. You yell at her? Do you get upset at her? The first reaction would be, wow, this person's ignorant. They don't know what they're doing. It's not that. It's that's the way it's been done for the past 100 years in our community. And so, like Tara said, we can't be quick to criticize. We have to take 2 steps back and understand, why is it done that way? And now what can I do to help empower the community and help educate them on a better way of doing it, without necessarily criticizing them? It's always easier said than done.
I think an important thing is the assumption is that you know more than everyone else. Going somewhere as a white man, for example, the minute I got there, they basically gave me the keys to the truck, to the whole place. They said, you're going to manage the team, you're taking over, you're the doctor, you're the nurse, you're everything. I'm like, I'm a nurse, I'm just from the city. But the assumption is that you know everything, so you really have to be careful and not put yourself in a position where you're going to hurt someone because you're letting everyone think that you know everything. So you have to step back and allow them to see your vulnerabilities in your practice, I guess.
It's a very interesting point you make, Shepard, because we're frequently very, very cautious about offending people and treading on toes. And as you say, frequently you are just given the keys to the town and sort of do whatever you please and run the whole place. And it's much more poisonous then. You then have to rein yourself in as opposed to having it for other people. So you're walking that line, as you said. I was wondering about leaving something behind. We're all back now in New York City. Do you think you managed to leave something behind? And if you did, how? And if not, is that okay to go and spend some time there and see the patients you saw and leave, and that was a moment?
In Sudan, we tried to have like a weekly or monthly, depending on how busy we were, kind of staff meeting with all the locals who worked in the hospital, and just try to have one topic that we explain something about. Like maybe we had a case of like meningitis or something along those lines, and we basically kind of do like a case study and explain the symptoms and this and that and go through everything. So we all learn from the one patient. I mean, we were all limited by time, but we did try to have like an educational session. We'd go over a patient, so all the locals in the hospital could also learn at the same time.
I think the most important thing is to leave goodwill, basically, to leave there. And one of the greatest compliments, you know, they